Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Martin Thibeault. I'm here with Pat Zalewski in his home in Cairns, Australia, and it's November 2022. This is the second in a series of interviews that we're doing to go over his early life and leading into discovering the Golden Dawn tradition and, of course, everything that trickled from there. So in this second interview, I do want to backtrack a little bit. Let's go back to what we were talking about in the previous one, and let's get into how you first discovered esotericism, occultism. When did you first come in contact with it?
Well, India, excuse me, India opened the door for that. We're getting into doing mantras, mandalas, things along those lines. When I was going through India, I had a Professor Tucci's book on the mandala, and I took that with me everywhere I went. That was really an interesting situation. But that led the doorway to chakras, worked on chakras, and it was in Tantra, that's what you do. And worked on the the seed mantras for the opening of the chakras, postures opening of the chakras. So really we had so that was the start of it. And there was a Catholic backup to that, led that to that, so I could translate some of that into Catholicism. But the idea of coming to New Zealand was in itself a lead into the Golden Dawn. I never got to really do the Golden Dawn till about 5 or 6 years into coming to New Zealand. It wasn't something I went straight away. I had to live a life.
Yeah, how'd you first come across it?
Oh, as I said earlier, in a shop, a book on Crowley. I read the book. I was interested in it.
So Crowley was the first exposure.
Yeah, reading a book about Crowley, it was a historical book about Crowley and the Golden Dawn. I sort of like what they said about Crowley, but also I was curious about the Golden Dawn, which trained him. That was a major aspect. And from that point, I got Rigardi's book in the mid-70s, and technical books in Wellington, and then I started on it, and I started up to throw the Enochian system. I got some. There were some people from the karate club came in and helped me out with some of them, not all of them, and they wanted to do some work on that as well. So we were working our way through things.
So you started with Enochian.
Well, that was side by side to what I did. I just jumped ahead, looked at it, and thought that was different in the way I went. There was no one could tell me I couldn't do this or I couldn't do that. Of course. I just went and did it.
Yeah.
So I was looking at the Enochian system, and I worked out the squares, and I knew they had a chess game, and that really intrigued me. And so
You're a chess player?
No, I didn't. I don't even like chess. I'm not orientated to that. But you have to understand that the reason that I came to New Zealand in the first place, in my opinion, was that I had to write a book. I knew that, beyond any shadow of a doubt. But I didn't know. I thought I had to write a novel, so I had a couple of basic novels. I thought, well, my senses are deceiving me. I'm getting nowhere here. But how it started really was the writing and everything else. Was I started doing work in the martial arts as a feature writer for a magazine. Mm-hmm. I don't know how the hell I got there, because I was the only one who was able to write, I think. Not that I wrote well, but I wrote. And I started doing a whole series of articles in the South Pacific Martial Arts magazine, which went on for a while, a couple of years. For Lynn Annabelle was the editor. And
it's not that magazine that you have on the wall and the frame.
No, that was another one again.
Okay.
So I'd met Bob Gamble, who was head of Kempo in New Zealand, and Bob had studied under Ed Parker, but he'd also done other work as well. He'd been to China and done all sorts of things, but not at that stage. And Bob contacted me. I hadn't seen Bob for many years, and he said, would you like to do some articles for something? I'm getting together a magazine called Insights into Martial Arts. I said, yeah, sure, no problem. I thought I'd write an article or two, and that was it. I ended up being a features editor for the magazine, so I ended up contacting all these people and doing features on them.
So here you are in New Zealand. You're writing stuff on martial arts. You bought Rigardi's Golden Dawn book, went straight to the Enochian system.
But yeah, I was doing South Pacific martial arts first. The Insights in the Martial Arts came many years later, and that led me with the ability to write. I knew I could write. Well, perhaps not well, but I knew I could follow a sentence and maybe follow a paragraph or two. And that was enough. And I could write about interesting things that people want to hear about. I started doing things on kinesiology and martial arts historian, which is what I got a couple of awards for, and the history of martial arts, who did what to whom, who snuck into whose bed one night, and who ran away, and who was a bastard and who was not. It was that sort of thing. And I got some help from other people too over in the States. So that was that was how that went. We had a lot of martial arts demonstrations. We had a very good setup in Wellington. I knew most of the people in martial arts in Wellington, and I got on pretty well with them. I don't think there was any that upset me. I even helped a few of them. When John Jarvis, who was head of Kokushinkai in New Zealand at one point, that he transferred over to another group, and he had to go over to Japan, and I got together and organised a public martial arts display which had Silat, it had karate, it had different forms of kung fu, and they were all. It just was a massive thing. It just went on for hours and hours and hours, and we got enough money to put it together and send John over. He was not in our style, and it was just one of these things. I got on pretty well with John. He was a good guy. I thought hardest man I've ever met. I think, with one exception. Coldest man, he had dead eyes. He was a former, used to on the bomb squad. He could look at something and pull it apart and have no emotion, just go in and do it. He was in the 100-man committee from Oyama, knew Oyama well.
But let's get into the GD then. So you get Rigardi's book, you start going into the Enochian system, you've got a few people close to you that are interested in it as well. Why were you drawn to it? Well, I mean, what did you want to do with that? I mean, all that
I don't
stuff.
know. See, what happened was it was like a revelation when I met Rigardi's book. I knew that was the reason I had to come to New Zealand. So it opened the door for something inside of me. I knew I had to come and write a book. I didn't know what. And when I got Rigardi's book, I knew it was about the Golden Dawn. And I thought, how the hell do I write about the Golden Dawn? I don't know anything about it, except what I'd read from Rigardi, so no one was going to listen to me. And so it turned out that I got married, of course, and I ran into a guy by the name of, and through, when we got interested in some of the people that came into the temple that we eventually, Thoth-Hermes temple, we eventually started in Wellington. We had about 15 members through. We used to do training once a week, believe it or not. We'd train and...
so you self-initiated to get into, you basically put things in motion.
Well, there was no one there to teach us. We did what a lot of other people did. We just got in there and I studied Dion Fortune, the works, and I just worked at it. I just jumped into ritual and away I went. It was that simple for me. Whether it was any good at it or not, I don't know. But the jury's still out on that one. But
you built all the tools?
Yeah, did the whole lot.
Wow.
And so what happened was that while we did all of that, we ran into Prior Wintle, who told us about Jack Taylor and the others. And I'd written to Von Daddelson. I got a name from my ex's.
Okay, so where'd that come from? How'd you get his name?
Well, what happened was that Chris she'd come from the same area as the Havelock North area, and she knew Masons. And so what she did was she wrote to a Masonic friend of hers whom she knew was in a Mason.
When you're saying Chris, you mean Christine's...
yeah, my ex, yeah. And she got a lead back and it said, contact these people. They might be able to help you. John Von Daddelson. So I wrote to John and he said, I'd like to help you. He said, but the temple's shut. And that's it. And I said, this doesn't sound right. I didn't come all this way to write a book and have the temple shut. I said,
this is what, in 77, 78, something like that? 78, I guess?
No, well, I married Chris about 80, 81, I forget which, and I was 80, I think it was.
Because it closed in 78, very well.
Yeah, right? Yeah, it shut in 78, yeah. So what happened was I wrote to him probably about 80, and he said, the temple's shut and that's it. And I said, I don't believe it, there's something going on here. I knew I felt it. So some of the guys in our temple knew other people who were connected to the OTO, and one of them was a guy by the name of Prior Wintle. And prior Winter was a sophisticato, ex-musician, slimy as hell to someone you want to wash your hands with if you shook hands with him. And anyway, it turns out that he knew about Jack Taylor and the OTR, and I said, that's it. There was a split in the group. So I wrote to Jack Taylor, and I wrote to Percy Wilkinson, actually. He mentioned Percy Wilkinson, but he also mentioned Jack Taylor in the conversation. And he said Percy, because Pryor was an astrologer, and Percy Wilkinson was an astrologer, said the comradeship. So Percy got my letter and took it down to see Jack. Now, Jack had been approached by numerous people to start Golden Dawn. He wouldn't have anything to do with them. But when he got my letter, he started jumping up and down for some reason, saying, just write this to him, write that to him. So he sent me the letter, and the letter arrived, I think, on the Friday. And I was due to fly up there to see Chris's parents the next day, because we'd just got married and we hadn't had a chance to do anything, really. I'd met both of them, but I hadn't actually gone back to the home with them. So the idea was for me to go up there and meet the parents anyway. So it turns out that I rang Jack up and I said, I've just got your letter. He said, oh, you got my letter. I rang. He had his address on, so I knew. I looked him up in the yellow, white pages. And he said, when are you coming up? I said, I'll see you tomorrow. He said, great. So he turned up, and his letter was there saying to come up and meet and connect. And the next day I turned up there.
But let's get into the Whare Ra stuff after, though. I'm going to pause you because I want to go back to Thoth-Hermes, because we're going to do a whole other interview just on you meeting with the adepts up there and getting into the Whare Ra stuff. But so basically between 75 and 80, you get Rigardi's book, you put together all the tools.
I probably got the books a bit later than that. It wasn't 75. I was still doing karate at that time. I think I was doing stuff probably about 79. I started to get into Rigardi's books. I got a backtrack on that. I think I got Rigardi's books a bit later. It was about 79. And I got there was the blue cover one.
Four volume, yeah.
No, yeah, just one.
Just one?
Yeah, just one volume. And he couldn't get over how well used it was when he came to me. That's another story. Yeah, so we tried the rudiments of a temple. We're going for about a year. And then I stopped teaching karate at that stage, and that sort of fell apart. And then I met Chris, and then somehow through the bookshops I connected with another group of others.
I mean, how did it go? You guys were obviously all self-taught, right? So you were putting each other through rituals, studying the knowledge lectures.
I did what everyone else does. I learned from the book, learned from the text, and see what I could do. Well,
obviously, there's no internet back then.
I'd done ritual magic. In a sense, through the church, which is what it is, called dramatic ritual. That doesn't make it sound oblique.
Dramaturgy, yeah.
And I'd also done it through tantric yoga, and read Tai Chi meditation is another thing as well. So we'd stopped the temple by then. We lasted for about a year, I think, and I still had all my Enochian stuff, and I was working on that. But I met Chris, and she liked chess, and so she got interested in that, and she got together and started. She wanted to do more into the esoteric side of things, and I said, well, what about this book? So she had a look at it and thought it was great. But she studied astrology on her own. Eventually became president of the Wellington Astrological Society, and she did a lot of work on the Enochian chess as the book dictates, and she got interested in alchemy at a later period. But so we worked as a duo for a while, and I knew this is what I was supposed to do.
An amazing sort of coincidence it is. Well, I don't know if it's a coincidence, but to find a book that you're really interested in, and then just started on your own.
Yeah. But to come to New Zealand, the reason why I came to New Zealand was obviously for the Golden Dawn, apart from marrying and meeting and creating grandchildren and one great-grandchild. They'd come into it. Yeah. And making whoopee in my first couple of years over there, right? I was worse than Bangkok. But that was a young guy on the loose.
But it's still pretty amazing to just find the publication of something like that happened to be in the same place where the last temple is still standing from the old days.
How I found out about the temple was there was a bookshop called Heiser's Books or House's Books in Wellington, and they had a book, Neville Spearman's book on the astral projection, Alchemy and the Golden Dawn by Francis King, and that opened the door for me. And then there was another book there called Sword of Wisdom. So I picked these two books up, and I knew that's what I was going to do. There was no question of it. And so when I started for the transition, what happened was when I was working for the government from about 1973, I think it was, 72, I forget. And I was there for about 14 years. I worked as a civil servant. So part of my job was a little bit boring. So I was learning Japanese on one part, I was continuing my Japanese studies, and the other part I was looking at, I ran an I Ching business. So what would happen was that the guy in the bookshop would come in, people would ask him questions, and I would send a type reply to them, and they would pay him $10, I think it was, and I'd give him something off the top. And the wages in those days were only about $50 a week. So they weren't big. It was about 1972, 73. So I was doing the I Ching, which is another element to the story, doing divination. And Heiser was a yoga guy, Dutch yoga guy. And so what happened was that I was just typing all these answers to these questions and sending them back and getting the money. I'd call in once a week and he'd pick up the cash. It was quite good. I had a good I Ching business there. And sometimes I get a couple of calls a day and I'd be banging out in the typewriter. I wasn't doing any bloody work for the government at that point because there wasn't much to do. That was in one period just before containerisation started to come in. I was busy. But anyway, so the story is that we started to get the business going, and it worked quite well for a while. And before we moved and the bookshop moved to another area or something, one lady asked to meet me, and I said fine, because I could do the whole thing over the phone, type something out. There wasn't an issue at all. And it turns out, she said, "You don't know me," she said, "but I've been a client of yours for a couple of years now, and your answers have been bang on." She said, "I'm the secretary of the trade union movement of New Zealand." And she said, "What's been happening for me with these questions is that when I wanted to know the answer to a trade union problem, I've been asking you. And you've been sending out these papers explaining all the differences and what to do and which way to go. I then passed it on to my boss, who's the secretary of the trade union movement, who couldn't figure out how come he thought that I had a source somewhere," she said, that was giving her this information. She said, "I'm never going to tell him what." But she said, "I've left the job." And I don't know if he had at that point, but she had left the job. She's an elderly lady. And she said, "I just want to thank you for all the effort that you've done." And so there I was, unknowingly, helping the trade union movement, doing I Ching movement, saying if you go there, that'll happen. If you do that, that will happen. You've got a bit of a problem. This was going on for about 12 months or more, 2 years. So that was one of the most interesting ones I had out of that. So that was still, divination was still part of it. That was a creep, mission creep, divination for the I Ching. And I'd studied that. I just did it on my own. I'd worked through... Dinah Farrington Hook's books were very, very good in the sense of giving you the wider scope of it. But so anyway, so I was quite pleased with that. That's the divination side. So that's what happened at work. Now, what do you want to know? That was in the early 70s. What else have you got?
Yeah. So just to a quick recap. So you come across the Gardy's GD book. You start to explore it on your own. Obviously, you're doing divination on the side, and then you end up finding out about Whare Ra.
I did that with those two books, Sword of Wisdom and the Astral Projection and Alchemy, and I knew the connection to make. But something happened. I really can't explain it, other than probably the ego took over. But I knew that some of the things that they were saying were wrong and they were doing something incorrect. And I thought, well, how the hell do I know this? I've never done this before. It was new to me. And turns out that I was right in the end with with my assumptions. So I always felt there was something looking over my shoulder, to be quite honest.
It's interesting feeling drawn or pulled that way. I'm gonna share my own experience. My first exposure to the GD was actually with your Kabbalah of the Golden Dawn book, and that was I think in '95. I came across that book through a friend of mine in Quebec, and I felt that exact same thing. Like it was something I didn't understand, but that I knew somehow it would end up having a huge impact on my life, and here I am in Australia with you some 27 years later or something like that.
Has it been that long?
But yeah, awesome. Well, so that's a little bit of what I wanted to get into for this interview, is just how you came into contact with the GD tradition and how that obviously ended up with you starting Thoth-Hermes. So you say you opened up Thoth-Hermes. You ended up traveling to go see these guys at Havelock North, and of course we're gonna do that. We're gonna get into that in the next one. But so did you close Thoth-Hermes at that point, or?
Well, just the idea of doing Thoth-Hermes was to do the rituals and experience the rituals.
Yeah.
We had a big house on the upstairs, and we had a downstairs flat, which is a downstairs apartment, 1.5 bedrooms, so to speak. So we had the whole living room of the downstairs unit was the temple, and so we used that, and we wanted to experience the Golden Dawn rituals, and we really, really experienced them well. We knew there was something coming through, and a lot of it too was the land that we were on, the area that we were in. So we were in the belly of a hill, and I could talk on my balcony to someone 600 yards away in a small voice, and they could hear every word I said. I don't know what hell the neighbourhood got on when we started doing ritual. When you get there, well, son, I forgot he had ball coming through. I think I must have scared the shit out of them, but anyway, I don't know what was going on. But we had some bad experiences too. We had a guy staying with us named Kevin Spackman. Kevin was in the downstairs flat, and he was a student of mine. And Kevin decided to live with us, and I would go down there and I would help him out. He worked through the grades with me, and he did a lot of work on it. And Kevin had issues with his health issues. He had some drug issues, I think, and he was recovering. But he seemed okay at that point. Anyway, one day, I got to know through Kevin the names of some of the people in the OTO in New Zealand, and one of them was head of I won't mention her name. She was head of the OTO in Dunedin. And she turned up with the boyfriend and wanted to buy Kevin's Equinox sets because he had a full set of Crowley's Equinox books. And Kevin said, no, I need them. He said, I'll swap you my car for the books. He said, they had the big car. I said, no, thank you. And he left. Later that night, we're up there watching TV, and I felt there was something wrong. I just knew it. So I went out on the balcony, I looked over, and there was someone trying to get in through the window. It was this guy.
Oh.
And I watched him. I turned the lights on. I watched him run in the front yard, across the road, and go up the road, which was a mistake because he had to bring the car back down. And he jumped in his big car, and there was Sharon, I shouldn't mention her name, sitting in the front seat, going out. And so we called the cops on him about trying to break in. They pulled him up and said, get out of Wellington. And he went up to Auckland with her. And I did a reading. I did an Abramalan square that said, keep them away from me. I don't want them hurt, just keep them away from me. I said, I don't want them back here causing problems in the house. And he was, apparently about 3 months later, he'd belted the hell out of her. She committed suicide. And she was on a stretcher, put into a plane, sent back down to her relations in Dunedin. When the OTO heard this, everyone gave me a wide berth after that point. It was nothing I did, it was just a synchronicity of all points because it was very, very clear.
You don't see a connection with the Abramalan Square?
I did the Abramalan Square, and then all the stuff started. But I don't think that was me because I said, don't hurt him, just keep him away.
Mm.
But she was working to her own time frame, to her own disasters. It was never going to work. I don't think this guy was nutty as a fruitcake.
So you're saying Thoth-Hermes was more almost not experimental, but it was a way of just getting together and exploring everything. And then obviously you started
It was
traveling.
a proper
up.
temple. We worked through the grades, studied the grades, did the rituals, made mistakes. And the thing was, temple was still going when I met Jack. We still had it going because I took some members up to meet Jack. So it was still in existence. And so that was interesting in itself.
Did it continue for a while after that? Or?
Yeah, it continued for a few years. I think it continued on until just after Jack died. I think it was 85. Then it sort of died off after that. We didn't put new members in. We were inundated with doing our own research. It was research after that, just research, day and night.
So when Rigardi visited you, was it 83 or 84, something like that?
August of 83.
You would have had the temple open at that time.
Yes, I did. And Kevin Spackman was there, and there was about one or two others. And he met some people in the OTO. Kevin introduced him. And he stayed for about a week. He stayed at the James Cook Hotel, but at first thing in the morning he'd come over and late at night he'd go home. That's how it worked. So we were together most of that period. And very interesting fellow, Rigardi, very interesting fellow.
What motivated him to come out? Like, what was his main reason?
I have no idea. I thought about this for years. Why would he come out to someone who's started a small temple? Plenty of people in the US have done it. I think the idea was because I was trained under Jack Taylor. He actually spoke to Jack Taylor on the phone. Jack sent him a letter, which I got the letter and passed on to him. So things were good in that respect. But I have no idea why he listened to me. I wrote to him about the process documents. I said, have you ever heard of them? Percy Wilkinson had about 5 or 6 of them. There was about 15 of them overall, and saw some additional drawings. And he said, no, I've never heard of them.
The continental processes, yeah.
Yeah, and so what happened was he said, I want to keep this conversation going. I said I was a member of a temple. And do you really want to get into this now?
No, we don't have to. I mean, I guess we can probably wrap this one up. I just wanted to get some perspective on how Thoth-Hermes started. And
well, it was that was it. I mean, so there were very, very strange cases. When I with the Thoth-Hermes temple, when I got, I was having a problem with my boss at one particular point. He was going a bit funny. I thought, well, what do I do? So I got hold of a spirit from the Goethe and I stuck it in his chair, and it was be best friends. That's all it was. It wasn't a thing. This guy went away for snail. He went away for snail, came back. Anyway, so I walked into work the Monday that he was coming back from his trip. We had peace and quiet for a week, but then he turned up again, so it's on again. And I found this piece of paper on the floor, right at my feet, and I said, I picked it up, looked at it. I thought it might have been my next door neighbour's. I asked him, he said no. So I said, I put it on the desk. He come back in, he said, Pat, he said, I've been down there to the South Island. He said, we're looking for this particular machinery, equipment or something or other like that. He said, I can't find any reference to it at all. I don't know what we're going to do. You have to go through the files. It could take days or weeks. And I've got a ministerial briefing that I've got to do, which is going to include part of this is the funding. I reached to the desk, picked up the paper and gave it to him. It was the one thing that he was after, ended up on my desk, which I found on the floor. I don't know how that happened, whether it was a cleaner dropped it or come off someone's desk, you didn't know, but all I knew was that the thing he wanted I had in front of me. It was on my feet. I picked it up first thing. He's my best friend after that till the time.
Magical has a way of doing things. Well, so, all right, we'll wrap this one up. And on the next one, I definitely want to get into what happens after you hear back from John Van Nadelson, and then, of course, get in touch with Jack Taylor from the first trip you get up there and all the people you're going to meet. And so we'll definitely do that. But for this one, we'll close it up. So thanks, Pat.
Okay, yeah. Great.